Alright, y'all, back with another political tier list. This time with Marvel superheroes, but specifically the movie and TV versions of the characters, so the MCU iterations. There's like hundreds of Marvel characters, so for the sake of time, I only chose like 30 of them. I'm rating them based off of how good of a politician they'd be, so not just if they're politically talented, but also if they would be a good public servant and actually do good things for the everyday people, which means being a great leader, but also being in support of policy that would help the middle class, the working poor. We'll start with Iron Man, Tony Stark. I think he would go in great leader, that category. The reason I put him in the great leader category and not presidential is because toward the end of his life, he was a pretty good leader. I don't think he'd make it as presidential because he's too dangerous. He's basically a billionaire tech bro, so I think that he'd be surrounded with a bunch of corrupt incentive structures. Next, we have Spider-Man. I think he would be presidential. He might be young and inexperienced, but he has a strong moral compass. He's very intelligent and a quick problem solver, but he's also relatable to everyday people. Unlike billionaire superheroes, he knows the struggles of the average person. And obviously he fights for justice, he's hardworking, resilient, all of those things. Next is Valkyrie. I think she'd be a great leader. She does have political experience. I believe in Thor Love and Thunder, she's the king of New Asgard. New Asgard is basically a population full of displaced people. So she has experience rebuilding a society from scratch. So it shows that she has the governance skills. Now, if she can just get her drinking problem under control, I think she has potential to be a presidential level. Next is Drax the Destroyer. Now, I think he'd be a terrible politician, but fuck it, it'd be entertaining to see. He's hilariously blunt and honest, which could be a good thing, but he takes everything literally. So that would make negotiations, speeches, and diplomacy a nightmare, but also entertaining at the same time. He also has unshakable confidence. So whether or not he understands a situation, he approaches it with absolute certainty. He's also impatient and hot-headed, and he might actually challenge political opponents to physical fights. So he'd be a terrible politician, but he would be very entertaining to see. Next we have the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. Now this might surprise some people, but I'm going to put her at presidential. Does she have a dark past? Yes. Does she have ties to the Russian government, which is kind of sketchy? Yes. But put that aside for a second. She's a master of strategy and diplomacy. She used to be a spy, so she can read people, and she's also really intelligent. And despite her dark past, she does have a strong moral compass. She's also quite charismatic and persuasive. I think as long as she surrounded herself with good people, I think she'd make an amazing president. Next is the Vision, and I think he'd be presidential as well. He's basically incorruptible. He has no personal desires for wealth, power, or status, and he wouldn't fall prey to lobbyists, bribery, or special interest groups. His main concern would be serving the people in the most fair, logical way possible. Being a robot, he might struggle with the game of politics, but he's a supercomputer, so I think he'd learn pretty quickly how to maneuver it. Next is Loki, and I think he'd be mid. He's entertaining, charismatic, and a great communicator, but his morality is flexible. He's prone to chaos and betrayal. I think he'd get us involved in a ton of conflict. He'd be a very divisive political figure, but Loki as a politician, I just wouldn't want him representing me. Next is Deadpool, Wade Wilson. Now I think he would be somewhere in between, would literally burn the country to the ground, and fuck it, it'd be entertaining to see. So let's put him there. He's unpredictable, scandalous, and would bring the chaos like Loki, but he has no patience for bureaucracy. He's a reckless decision maker, and he would probably fight or kill his political opponents. Next is Steve Rogers, Captain America. And obviously, he would be presidential. He doesn't just lead people, he inspires. And unlike most politicians, Steve wouldn't be motivated by power or money or personal ambition. His only concern is doing what's best. He unites rather than divides. He holds government accountable. He's willing to compromise for the greater good. And he also has experience leading under immense pressure. Next is Rocket Raccoon. Now, I love Rocket, but he would literally burn the country to the ground.
Hell no!
He's intelligent, strategic, and loyal, but He has the shortest temper ever, which equals instant chaos. He would insult every foreign leader that he doesn't agree with. He's notorious for stealing. Rocket would likely stir up a bunch of chaos around the world and then say, "Screw this, I'm out," and then disappear into space. So he wouldn't even finish his term. Next is Sharon Carter. Now, I think she'd be mid. She is intelligent and she does have experience in government, but in her latest appearance in the MCU, she has connections to the criminal underworld and she's become a power-driven, corrupt person. But in the past, she used to have a strong sense of justice. I predict that we'll see her in some of the next Marvel projects, and I predict that she'll turn it around and that she'll become good again. But for now, she's mid. Next is Daredevil Matt Murdock. I think he'd be a great leader. He has a deep commitment to justice, and he's a part of the working class, so he would be seen as relatable to voters. But he's a workaholic and he has self-destructive tendencies, which would hold him back from being presidential. Next is Queen Ramonda from Black Panther. She would be presidential. She leads with boldness and compassion. She has great diplomatic skills, and she's also very protective of her people. And she has zero tolerance for nonsense, which I think would be a breath of fresh air, at least in American politics. Next is Thor. I think he'd be a great leader. Sometimes he's not focused, and he's not a strategic thinker. He's more of like a warrior, if that makes sense. I think he'd get his country into a lot of wars. So for that reason, can't be presidential, but he's got some great potential. Next is the Hulk, Bruce Banner. Now, it depends on which version of the Hulk we're talking about here. If we're talking about Smart Hulk, Professor Hulk, which is the version that we see in Avengers Endgame and beyond, then he'd be in presidential or great leader because he's able to control himself. But if we're talking about anything before Avengers Infinity War, it would be a disaster. So I think we should just err on the side of caution. He would probably burn the country to the ground.
Hell no!
Next is Phil Coulson, Agent Coulson. He has all of the tools to be a presidential level politician except the charisma. And I think that's important. So I'll put him under great leader. Phil is great under pressure. He's great at diplomacy. He's loyal, has a strong moral compass, knows the ins and outs of government, but I would question his ability to inspire people. Next is Shuri from Black Panther. I think she'd be a great leader. She's obviously a genius, and she's very progressive thinking. I think she would push for positive change for everyday people, and she would have a pretty progressive agenda, but I think she struggles with compromise and with bureaucracy. But if she can improve in those areas, I think she'd easily be presidential. Next is Thunderbolt Ross, the Red Hulk. For obvious reasons, he would burn the country to the ground.
No.
Next is Starlord Peter Quill. I think he'd be mid. He's charismatic, great at uniting people, and he understands different cultures and perspectives, but he's impulsive, doesn't respect rules or authority. He has a questionable work ethic, and let's be honest, he's a PR nightmare waiting to happen. Next is Nick Fury. Now, he's obviously a really good leader. He's very strategic, but I don't think he would quite be presidential. I think he just has too many secrets to be a presidential level politician. He has all the talent of a great politician, except for his ability to inspire. Next is Wong. He would be presidential. He's respected by everyone. He's a master negotiator and diplomat, and he's very disciplined and strategic, but also has a big heart. In a general election, he'd win in a landslide, with FDR-like numbers. Next is Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, and he's going to go to mid. In the latest Marvel project, Captain America Brave New World, he's actually running for Congress, and in the Thunderbolts movie, it looks like he is a congressman. He gets elected, so we'll have to see if he actually is a good politician or not. So for now, we'll leave him at mid. Next is Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. I'll put him at mid. Next is Sam Wilson's Captain America, formerly the Falcon. I think he'd be presidential, and for pretty much the same reasons as Steve Rogers is. Next is Heimdall. I think he'd be a great leader. Rhodey, aka War Machine. I like him a lot. I think he has political talent, but at the end of the day, he's just got a mid. Next is T'Challa, aka Black Panther. In the MCU, he's a great king. He's fair, just, bold, inspiring. He'd make a great politician, presidential level.